From today, I want to talk about the chapter Hachi-dainingaku. Hachi means 8. Dainin means a great person, but also in Japanese it could mean an adult, a true adult. Kaku means something that you awaken to or that you are aware of. So you could say 8 awarenesses or 8 awakenings, 8 things that true adults are aware of. 8 things that a true adult awakens to would be possible translations of the title of this chapter. In many translations of the Shobogenzo, it comes last, because it was the last chapter that Dogen Zenji wrote. We usually talk about the Shobogenzo, but actually there's different editions, there's different versions. There's one version that contains 75 chapters. The first one is probably the most famous, that's the Genjo Koan. But a lot of other famous chapters like the Bussho chapter on Buddha nature or Uji on time and being. But at one point in his life, Dogen Zenji started to write the Shobogenzo anew from scratch. So he started again with chapter 1. And this second version of the Shobogenzo, in Japanese it's called Juni Kambon, which means 12 chapter Shobogenzo. The other one is the 75 chapter Shobogenzo. And Hachi-dainingaku, the 10 things that a true adult awakens to, is the last. So it's the 12th chapter. And according to the, the words that Dogen Zenji's first disciple, Ejo Zenji, who also wrote the Zuimonki, so he wrote a few sentences at the end. And according to these sentences, Dogen Zenji had originally planned to write or to extend this new Shobogenzo to 100 chapters. So he had plans to write a lot more, but because he died when he was 53, this chapter became his last chapter. He wrote it about 6 months before his death. I think this was written in February, or, well, we say February, but it's actually the 2nd month of the year, and the year often started in February. So February at that time would have been March, probably. And he died 6 months later in what we would call August, but it was the 8th month, so probably it's more like September. How do these different versions of the Shobogenzo differ? Dogen Zenji was a very original thinker, and some people say that actually he was the profoundest philosopher that Japan had, especially in the early Shobogenzo chapters. Dogen Zenji develops his own thought, and whenever he quotes teachings, or for example he quotes a koan, he gives it a different spin. He gives it his own spin. But then at one point, after he had moved to Eiheiji, he started to write the Shobogenzo anew, and most of the time he doesn't add anything by himself. He's using a lot of quotes, he's quoting a lot from the sutra, and often he does nothing but just praising what the Buddha says in the sutras. So from the point of view of a lot of people, the later Shobogenzo is kind of boring, because it's only quotes. And in a way, you could say that's also true about the chapter that we talk about now, because the biggest part is a quote from a sutra that is in Japanese called Yui-kyō-gyo. Supposedly, it's the last teaching of the Buddha. But I think it's actually a sutra that was written in China. So it was written centuries after the Buddha died. But at least the authors of this sutra pretended it was the last sutra of the Buddha, and it's also chanted in Antaiji, usually on Nirvana Day, on February 15th. And this chapter quotes a good portion of this sutra. Let me read a little bit from the English translation. On the internet, you can find the Nishijima translation that you also have in the library in Antaiji. There's also another translation that's used in Shasta Abbey, but maybe today I will only read the Nishijima translation. I personally prefer that to the other translations that you can find on the internet. Nishijima translates the title as The Eight Truths of a Great Human Being. And the translator notes, Hachi means 8, Dainin means great human being, that is a Buddha. And about that, maybe I will say a few words in a minute or so. Dainin actually, means a great human being, but it could also mean just an adult. It could also simply mean an adult person. And kaku, in the end, pronounced here as gaku. So some people read this Hachi-dainingaku, some people read it Hachi-dainingaku. Whatever. Pronounced here as gaku means an intuitive reflection or truth. You could also say something that you awaken to. Gautama Buddha preached the 8 truths of a great human just before he died. And they are recorded in the Yui-kyō-gyo, the Sutra of Bequeathed Teachings. And as I said, this is a teaching that originates in China, but actually in the Pali Canon, you do not find exactly this sutra, but these 8 truths you find in a different sutra. 先ほど日本語で言い忘れましたけれども、この八大人学が出てくる唯教行はどうやら中国で作られたお経ですけれども、パリ経典にもこのお経はないんですけれども、別の設定で別の場面で釈尊は同じ八大人学を説いてますね。今から取り上げる小欲知足から最後の不ケ論までの八大人学はパリ経典にも一応出てきますね。ただそこでは最後の教えとしては伝えられてなかった気がしますね。日本語でもスマナサラ長老がこの八大人学について、講義している本が確かにあったと思います。安泰寺の図書室にもこの本はあった気がしますね。ただタイトルまでは今はちょっとわからないんです。Back to the English. According to the Yui-kyō-gyo, these were the Buddha's last teachings. Master Dogen preached this chapter when he felt his death was not far away. So he preached or wrote this chapter 6 months before his death. And in his case too, it was his last teaching. This chapter thus forms the last chapter in the 95 chapter edition of the Shobogenzo. Here Nishijima talks about a 95 chapter edition. Basically what he means is the 75 chapter edition, plus the 12th chapter Shobogenzo, plus 8 chapters that were later discovered in other places. And if you put all of these together, you have the 95 chapter edition. But in Dogen's time, there was no 95 chapter Shobogenzo. He just wrote different texts that were all called Shobogenzo. And now the first sentence of the chapter itself reads, Buddhas are great human beings. So Dogen Zenji here explains the term dainin. He says, the Buddhas are great human beings. The Dharma that great human beings realize is therefore called the 8 truths of a great human being. To realize this Dharma is the cause of nirvana. So Dogen Zenji talks about the 8 realizations that a Buddha has. Now when we read this, probably we will tend to think, well, okay, that's great, but then these great human beings have nothing to do with me. We talk about people like, well, the Buddha himself, or Amitabha, or Maitreya, or maybe Avalokiteshvara. But this word dainin, when you write it in characters, modern Japanese would read it otona, which means adult. And actually Uchiyama Roshi reads it this way. He says, Dogen Zenji here talks about the 8 realizations of a true adult person. And recently I haven't been using the word adult so much in my talks, but there was a time about 10 years, 20 years ago where in almost every talk I gave, I used the expression adult practice. Actually, there's a whole series of articles that you can still find in the archive section of the Antaiji website. I wrote every month an article about adult practice. And what I wrote in the series and also what I talk about in my talks a lot is my first encounter with my teacher in Antaiji was when I was 22. I was still a college student, but I decided to go to Antaiji for 6 months. And when I arrived, the abbot called me to his quarters. He served me tea and asked me, why have you come here? And I said, to learn something about Buddhism. I hope that you can teach me something about Zen. And when he heard that, my teacher says, how stupid. This is not a school. You create Antaiji. You create Antaiji. And for me, this is kind of the first adult realization, the first realization that you need to have as an adult. Antaiji is not a school. You don't go there as you would go to elementary school or middle school or even high school in the hope that the teachers will teach you something. You go there because you want to practice. It's your practice. You don't do it for the teacher. You don't do it for somebody else. And of course, that's an experience that all of you will have made already. Even though you might have heard, you create Antaiji. Actually, there's not much that you can create in Antaiji. The schedule is fixed. You get up 3:45 in the morning. You follow the schedule until 8 at 9. Even on the free days, often you have to cook in the kitchen. And when you're the cook, there's a certain freedom, of course, to decide the menu, but it's not that you can create a lot of stuff in the kitchen as well. So what does it mean to create Antaiji? In my words, now it would mean you have to discover Antaiji. You have to discover this place. You have to discover the possibilities of Antaiji. You have to discover the freedom that Antaiji offers to you, even though most of the day is fixed by the schedule. The most obvious example are the 5-day sessions. What can you create during a 5-day session? You have to sit from 4 to 9 on your mat. What freedom is there? But actually, these 5 days are your time if you discover them as your time. They belong to you and only to you, if you discover them as that. Otherwise, it's almost like in jail, or even worse. Probably you have more freedom in jail than in an Antaiji session. Unless you have the realization, I sit here because that's what I want to. So that for me means I create Antaiji. It's my place, it's my practice, it's my time. And then there's this other story that I also tell a lot. When I was 25, I ordained as a monk at Antaiji, and I had to do the Tenzo training, and I had to cook noodles for lunch. In the beginning, I didn't know how to do the noodles, the udon, so I did them spaghetti al dente style, but they turned out too hard. So the older monks told me, please, next day, make them a little bit softer. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna make them really soft for you. And I cooked them for 30 minutes. And the next day, it was, how would you say it? They dissolved. It was udon soup. And of course, again, I got scolded for that. And it was never quite right. The udon were never quite right. The miso soup was never quite right. Nothing was quite right. I always got criticized for the failures in the kitchen. So one day I said, but I didn't come to Antaiji to learn how to cook here. I came to practice Zen. And when my teacher heard that, he said, it's not about you. You don't count at all. Or in Japanese, omae nanka dodemo ii. Omae nanka dodemo ii. And actually, although I'm telling this story over and over again, I made this story up. Actually, it never happened exactly this way. Although it's not a complete lie either. So it's true that I wasn't a very good cook, and I got a lot of criticism in the kitchen. I got yelled at in the kitchen. And also my teacher said things like, it's not about you. You don't count at all. But the first time I heard this from my teacher, actually it was in a different setting. The true story is like this. It was in the summer. And at that time, in August, a lot of the monks went to the island of Kyushu to help out in other temples that were busy during the Obon season. But a few of us stayed to take care of the temple. And also in August, we sent out letters to colleges and universities all over Japan, and invited students to come during the summer holidays and experience life at Antaiji for 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. And sometimes there were about 10 or so students visiting the temple. And that means that the unsui that stayed back at Antaiji had to take care of the fields, had to take care of the tambo, but also had to take care of the students. And the students in the heat had to join in the zazen and had to join in the agricultural work. And at one point, My teacher, the abbot, Nishijima Roshi, told the head monk at the time, why don't you all go to the beach today? Take a day off. It wasn't a hosan, it was a regular day, but he said, why don't you take a day off today? Go to the beach and have fun, everybody. And the problem was we only had this 1 2-ton truck and not everybody fits on the truck. A couple of people had to use the bicycle. Also, some people had to hitchhike. And it was because not everybody knew where the beach was. It was difficult to organize for the head monk so that everybody would reach the beach in time and nobody got lost. And also the whole thing was complicated by the fact that there was one Sanzensha from Mexico. And he said, I didn't come to Antaiji to go to the beach and enjoy myself. I want to practice Zazen here. So while you go to the beach, I will stay in Antaiji and sit by myself in the Hondo. I will do a 1-day sesshin by myself. And when the head monk heard that, he was already pretty stressed. And then there was this Mexican who told him that he didn't want to go to the beach in the first place. So he went to the abbot and asked him what he should do about the Mexican guy. And the abbot says, well, if he doesn't want to go to the beach, you don't have to take him to the beach. He can stay back here in Antaiji and do what he wants. And when the head monk heard that, he said, but I don't want to go to the beach either. I would rather stay back here and read a book or do something. I don't want to go to the beach either with all these crazy foreigners and students and whatever. And when the head monk said that, the abbot said exactly what I always tell in this story about me not being able to cook the udon. It's not about you. You don't count at all. So that's when I first heard that. So actually it wasn't myself, but my senior that got scolded on that day. But to me, it sounded as if he was talking to me as well. But I could also feel with my senior, I could feel this, but how come that I'm supposed to care for all these others and, how do you say, cater to their wishes, make sure that they get to the beach or that they can stay back here if they want to. But then if I don't want to go to the beach, it's not about me. Isn't there a contradiction? Why don't you tell the Mexican guy it's not about him? I don't know about you, but in Antaiji, I went through this. It felt a little bit like growing up or kind of growing into this adult position from being a more childish position. In the beginning, even though somebody tells you, you create Antaiji, in the beginning you get a lot of attention from the older people. When you do your best, also people often, well, they praise you for that. But the longer you stay, I had the feeling, the less praise you get, the less attention you get. And for a long while, I was wondering why. Why? In the beginning, everybody was, oh, Muho, 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 and he's doing a great job, and he's so young, and still he speaks Japanese so well. He makes such a big effort to study, and he sits Zazen so well. He's so enthusiastic. But then after 2 or 3 years, nobody mentions Muho anymore. Now it's about the other young guys. And people take for granted that you do your best. People take for granted that you make an effort. And nobody praises you if you do good, but you get criticized. And not only for your mistakes, but even for the mistakes of the younger ones. And the abbot, for example, will tell you, how come that this newcomer still can't use his olyoki? How come that he doesn't do his job right when he's the tenzo or when he's doing samu? And you by yourself think, but why don't you tell him directly? I taught him over and over again how to use the olyoki. I taught him how to be a good tenzo. I taught him 10 times, 20 times how to do samu. And he still can't do it. Please don't criticize me. Please tell him directly. But more often than not, the abbot wouldn't do it. The abbot would criticize me for the failures of my juniors. And it felt a little bit like at home, for example, at a certain age, it often happens that, for example, your parents will say, but you're already, for example, in Japanese, you would say, onichan desho, onechan desho. You're the older brother, you're the older sister. You feel, how do you say, frustrated that your younger brother, your younger sister gets all the attention, a different treatment than you. But in the eyes of your parents, you're already 10 years old, 12 years old, 14 years old. Or it might even happen that you're already 18 and you still want the attention that you got when you were 3, 4, 5 years old, but you don't get it and you're frustrated. Hey, you're already 18. It's time to stand on your own feet. Not only that, in the case of Antaiji and also in the case of a family, often you should stand on your feet and also help your younger siblings that can't stand on their own feet already. And when you make this kind of experience that something more of you is expected than you were giving until then, it can be a painful experience, but also an important experience. So for me, Otona or Dainin, the realizations of a Dainin, these are kind of the two different important things that I always mention. It's, in a way, it's all about you. You create Antaiji, it's your practice. If you don't become a Buddha, nobody will be a Buddha. You have to become a Buddha here, now, at Antaiji. And then it's not about you. Who cares about your practice? Who cares about your Buddhahood? What can you do for the others? Forget about yourself. These two things, for me, constitute a dainin, a true adult person. So when Dogen Zenji in this chapter talks about a dainin, he doesn't mean only great persons like Śākyamuni or Avalokiteshvara, Manjushri, but he's talking about you as an adult practitioner. Maybe only a short English version. I talked only about the beginning of the very first realization of a true adult. I haven't read the whole topic yet. The Japanese title is Shōyoku, and Shōyoku is explained as, let me read the Nishijima translation. Small desire, he says in English, not widely to chase after those among objects of the 5 desires that are as yet ungained, is called small desire. Not widely to chase after those among objects of the 5 desires. I don't know if that's proper English. I'm not a native speaker, so I suppose it's proper English, but it sounds funny to me. Basically, what is meant by the 5 desires is things that we see, hear, smell, taste, or feel with the body, and we want to have it. I want to have it. All of us have these desires. We want this or that. We want to eat something delicious. We want to have a car that somebody else says, I want to have the same car. When we hear about somebody who traveled to India, I also want to travel to India. I never traveled to India. I need to travel to India. I need to have this car. I need to have this girlfriend. And the problem is not the desire, but our chasing after the desire. Widely, he says here, widely chasing. So without stopping, we don't know when to stop. Even when we realize I will never get everything I want, we never stop. We don't know how to stop. And that's what makes us suffer. So basically, here the text explains what Buddhism teaches with the Four Noble Truths. We are suffering. We are never satisfied. Why is that? Because we never stop chasing. We never stop chasing. But, and that would be the third noble truth, you can stop. You can stop right now in this moment. The way to practice that would be the Eightfold Path. And there's a deep connection between the Eightfold Path that we find in the Four Noble Truths and the 8 realizations of a true adult. But there's also differences. The connections are the points 4, 5, 6, and 7 in this chapter, and they correspond to the points 1, 2, and 6, 7, 8 in the Eightfold Path. Point 4 in this chapter would be to make an effort, or how does Nishijima translate this? Practice diligence. That would be point 5 in the Eightfold Path. Being diligent, making a right effort. Usually we say right effort in English. Making a right effort, being diligent. Then the next one would be to always be mindful, aware, or in this text, it's to not forget. How does Nishijima say? There's nothing like not losing mindfulness, not losing mindfulness. And the next one would be to practice samadhi, concentration. And today in Zen, we don't differentiate so much between mindfulness and samadhi, concentration. But in Theravada, there's the distinction between samatha and vipassana, and I think it corresponds to that. One of that is a deep state of stability. The mind is stable, like a mountain. And the other one is a state of clarity. You see clearly what's before you, what's around you, what is in you. And in Zen, you would say, well, one is necessary for the other, but neither one is more important, and also you can't really divide them. But for centuries in Buddhism, you would actually divide them and maybe even practice them one after the other. So in the Eightfold Path, you have mindfulness first, right mindfulness, and then at the end you have right concentration. Here in this chapter, it's also first, don't forget mindfulness, and then is practice concentration. And number 7 in this chapter would be practicing wisdom, which would correspond to the first 2 of the Eightfold Path, which is right view and right thinking. Seeing things as a Buddha would see them as they are, without looking through the glasses of illusion. And thinking without putting yourself in the center. And usually we learn to do that when we are 3, 4, 5 years, when we first say I. We build this story of our life, of the world, and we're at the center of the story. It's a story that is about us. And true thinking would be to take oneself out of the center. What I meant with, it's not about you. You don't count at all. And so that's the connection between the Eightfold Path and the 8 realizations in this chapter. But the differences is the first 2, small desires and knowing it is enough, is something that you don't find in this form in the Eightfold Path. And also the number 3, yearning for a place of quietude, you don't find in the Eightfold Path. And the last one, how does Nishijima translate the last one? Idle discussions. So not engaging in idle discussions is the very last of the 8 realizations of a true adult. And you could say that that corresponds to right speech. Right speech means to not lie. For example, to tell the truth. And you could say that not engaging in idle discussions is also part of that. But I have the feeling, and I will talk about that later when we get to this last point, that in this chapter something more is meant. There's a reason why not engaging in idle discussions doesn't come somewhere in between, in the middle, but at the very end. Okay, so much about the connection between the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and the chapter that I'm talking about right now. I haven't really, how do you say, started with the actual text, so I haven't read what Dogen Zenji or the sutra that he's quoting is saying about small desires, but I will do that next month. Anyway, thank you for listening so far. And as always, if you have questions or anything that you would like to comment, you're welcome to do so.
Oh, Mura-san, hello.
Jikai-san, hello, nice to see you.
Perhaps my question really is more of a technical one, I think, which is Dogen Zenji, did he decide on these chapters of the Shobogenzo and then based on Buddha's teachings and then use sutras to explain them, or did it come the other way around, do you think? Did you say the sutras first and then he wrote the chapters?
Well, the short answer would probably be I don't know. But, well, I have the feeling that when he started to write the 12th chapter Shobogenzo, I think he had in his mind something like, how do you say, a textbook that would cover everything from like the day you ordain, or maybe even the first day when you arouse the aspiration to practice the way. Also what he covers there is the importance of the precepts, of course, the importance of the kesa that you wear. So probably he wanted to cover everything in 100 chapters. But the chapter that we're talking about right now, the last one, probably Dogen felt at that point he didn't have the time to cover everything. So in this chapter, he's basically, it's a little bit like a testament that he wants to, in a very short form, give his students, in a nutshell, so to speak, what the way or what the Dharma is all about. And he found that in the Yuikyo-gyo, which is supposedly the last teaching of the Buddha. So Dogen Zenji probably felt that his life was not so long anymore, that he would die soon, and that's why he chose this teaching that the Buddha gave when he felt, well, actually, I'm dying in a couple of hours. But there's really not much, how do you say, material that could tell us about kind of what Dogen Zenji had actually in his mind, kind of the map that he had in his mind of the Shobogenzo, and how much of the old Shobogenzo, which is the biggest part of what we have, also in the English translation, the biggest part that you have are the chapters that he wrote before he even started with the new one. So we don't know if he wanted to maybe rewrite all of these, or maybe, how do you say, trash all of these altogether. If he maybe thought that this was unripe, we don't know that. We don't know that, but maybe from the perspective of the older Dogen, had the feeling that as a young monk, maybe he was, how do you say?
Yeah.
I said he was original, but the same, I mean, is true for us today practicing in Japan or practicing in the West. That we are very, how do you say, attracted by the freedom of Zen, that you don't even have to know the Four Noble Truths. Nobody asks you if you can name all of the 8 ways or whatever. You don't have to believe in the Buddha. We are, how do you say, drawn to sayings like by Rinzai, when you meet the Buddha, kill him. But the danger with that is, well, then who's the Buddha? I am the Buddha. What I think is true is the Dharma. And you don't even bother to read the sutras. Why would you recite the sutras? I heard that the Zen monks wiped their ass with that. And well, the danger with that is you only pick whatever fits you. And the old Dogen probably saw the dangers with that. And we probably today see the dangers with that in present day Zen. So the old Dogen was kind of returning to, well, let's hear what the Buddha himself had to say. Before we kill the Buddha, let's meet the Buddha, let's listen to the Buddha, and then we can see what actually killing the Buddha means. That's how I kind of understand the old Dogen. But again, there's really not much to decide what he really wanted to write in those chapters that he finally ended up not writing because he died so early.
Excellent.